Robert, can you hear us? You can. Yeah, there you go. You unmuted now. You there, Robert?
We'll go ahead and get started. So we're recording. My name is Chelsea O'Reilly. I'm the district manager here at Gateway. With me, I have Keith Rowe, Public Works Director. Parks and Recreation falls under Public Works, at least here. Tim Holland is our Recreation Manager. Considering this is your first meeting, I'll kind of help you guys get underway, give some explanations. First order of business is, I don't know if any of you have history with in types of committees, but we'll walk you through it. If you have any questions, don't forget to ask. Typically, start with chair and a vice chair, which you guys will nominate who that person are. They would be the ones on the meeting. So in the interim, you guys make those nominations. We'll call the meeting to order. It is 2:32 p.m., January 31st. You could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, justice for all.
All right, so the next step is organization of committee. So that I will open it up. Any nominations of a chairperson?
To be the chairperson.
What are you picking on me for?
Because I saw your name right there. That's why, Carlo.
So is there
You look
any?
like a good leader.
So the role of the chair is essentially you hold the meeting, you host the meeting, you don't have any other weight than any of the other members. Basically run essentially what it do. If there's a staff issue, most of the time we'll go to the chair before we get. So that's kind of the general.
What would I have to do as far as?
You would sit in the front, and just like I did with the start of this meeting, you call it to order, you go through each agenda item. If there is public comment, you would ask for public comment. You would set the
I
pace.
think you get nominated, so I'm saying they didn't say why either single line.
George, you're not muted.
Nope.
Thank you. All right, is there any other nominations? Robert? Okay.
No nomination.
Pardon?
I was just saying I had no other nomination.
Okay. With that, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, 5-1, or 5-0. Congratulations, Carlo. So,
Thanks a lot, Patricia.
so with that, we'll open it up. Are there any nominations for a vice chair?
Patricia.
Any other nominations? All right, all those.
Maria, nominate Maria.
All right. With that, all those in favor? Patricia? All those in favor for Patricia signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, and 5-0. Congratulations. So now typically, Carlo, you would sit where either in Patricia's seat, say that 5 times fast. And then you would sit to his right, because that's typically the chair and then vice chair. So you can choose to move now, or you can do it at your next meeting. It's totally up to you. So thank you for your service, all of you. So with that, we'll just go through and do a roll call. As our transcriptionist is learning your guys' voices, I just ask before you speak, just announce your name, Chelsea, and then say whatever you need. Susan, or just say your name before you speak. With that, if you want to go around the room, just say your name and that you're present.
Maria Logophides, and I'm Howell, present.
Carla Cifarelli, present.
Dale, present.
Robert Vertrees, present.
Perfect. Now,
Okay, you gotta go into the board.
because Robert is remote, we have to, just like at the board level, we have to approve through extenuating circumstances that he participate virtually. And so with that, we'll need a motion to allow Robert to participate in this committee meeting virtually. Tony can change extenuating circumstances, Tony?
Exceptional.
Exceptional. Thank you.
Exceptional. Okay,
Need a motion.
okay, I move to allow Robert to participate.
Is there a second?
A second.
All right. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Perfect.
Aye.
So keeping in mind in the future, we have to have a physical quorum here in person, which is 4 or more for this committee. You guys meet that quorum today, so that means if you don't meet quorum, you can meet and discuss, but you can take no action. If you have quorum, you can meet and discuss and take action. So, and you'll probably see emails from Georgia in the future. Please confirm your attendance because we hate to waste anybody's time. With that,
Chelsea,
yes.
just for a little housekeeping, since Robert was, well, never mind, because there was a quorum that elected the chairman. I take it back. So he had a sufficient quorum. Never mind.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
I'm fine. Thank you.
Yep. Keeping me in check, Tony. Tony is our legal counsel for the district. So with that, Carlo, you would, at this point, go down, you're going down the agenda. You would turn it over to public comment. Yes, please come.
This isn't public comment. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Carol Pancaw. I'm the newest member of the Gateway Services CDD. And I won the election in November and then was put on. So newest person gets to be the liaison to the new committee. So I am your liaison. So I am not part of your committee, but I will be here. I will listen to your discussion. If you take action on something, that will come directly to the board at their next board meeting. But a lot of times I might choose to just write up a little report about maybe some of the discussion or what issues came up or something like that. I won't report on your recommendations to the CDD, but I may comment on something. I don't know. So that's the role of the liaison. So when the CDD sits down, if they say, well, Carol, I know the Parks and Rec committee, they've been talking about slides. What have they been saying? And I say, well, they had some discussion about slides as opposed to swings, and they thought slides would be better, or they don't think slides are good because it might be a safety issue or something like that. I don't know what, but that would be my role. So when you see me over here, I'll just wave to you. But anyway, my name is Carol Pancaw.
Thank you, Carol.
Nice meeting you. Carol, is that P-A-N-K-O-W?
Thank you, Carol.
A-A-U.
Carol,
Think of a frying pan that goes hot, hot, and a throw that goes hot, 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 and hot.
so Carol is the newest member to our Board of Supervisors. They meet the first and third Thursday of each month. So, and these board liaisons are new, not just to this committee, but to all of the committees. And we feel like that will help the transparency and communication between the board and the committees up and down. So, thank you for your public comment. At this next part, you would go under the approval of minutes. You'd ask for a motion if you had minutes. Of course, we don't have any. This is your meeting. So you would ask for approval of minutes, a motion for that. Make that motion and then proceed to the next. Please make sure that you're reviewing the minutes when you post these agendas, because those are forever in our records. So we want to make sure that the transcriptionist, because she is on the other coast, she looks at this stuff on a recording, that she gets exactly what you guys were trying to get across. You'll get them as part of this agenda packet,
Okay.
and the agenda normally comes out a week in advance of your meeting.
Okay, so we'll get the meeting minutes from this meeting
At your
next week.
at your next meeting.
Get them at the next meeting, a week before.
Yes.
Okay. Thank
So then the next part is a financial report. We'll be providing that for each month for the Parks and Rec line items. Keith, ultimately the budgeting and budgeting oversight comes from Laura, who is our assistant district manager, but the actual expenditures and how that funding gets spent on a day-to-day operations comes from Keith and his staff. Tim Holland, our Parks and Rec manager, I mentioned earlier. So you'll get a financial report of kind of where we stand on certain line items. And then the next section is items for discussion. And with that, I will turn it over to Tony, who is our attorney, and he is going to give you guys a presentation on the Sunshine Law and everything it relates to that. This is the same presentation our Board of Supervisors gets. And it's just to educate you on Sunshine Law. So,
Okay. Thank you, Chelsea. And let me, I had the agenda item up there a second. And you have the PowerPoint for the committee?
yes, yes. Can you share?
I don't know how to share well.
No. We're doing it from our side.
Okay, thank you. I'm not Zach. Zach, welcome members of the committee. My name is Tony Pierce, the law firm of Woodward Pierce Lombardo, Maine District Council, and work with you all today and to have a brief introduction to the government in the Sunshine Law. There's also another component of public records law, but we'll focus today be on the Sunshine government in the Sunshine Law. One of our associates, one of my partners, Lenore Brakefield, and our associate Zach Lombardo also work extensively with district staff on matters. So at times you may hear their voice or see their presence at your committee meeting. The government in the Sunshine Law, and what's really important as an outset, and we mentioned this before we had a presentation to the Pelican Reserve Advisory Committee, Stony Brook Advisory Committee, and the board recently, is that the district council should be the first person you direct questions to if you have any questions or concerns with regards to the Sunshine Law. Others, whether other attorneys who are not representing the district, we're outside retained counsel for the district. We represent the district, the board, management, and provide guidance also to the committees of the district. In the Florida Sunshine Law, it's a very conservative approach we take because, as you'll see later on, there are civil and criminal penalties that can apply if there are violations. And again, this is just like a little political cartoon with regard to the press, is, sort of taking a shot at a public officer for, hey, I can't wait to do the public's business. Let's discuss this in private. And that's not the overall arching theme we want to present. The overview is the Florida's government, the Sunshine Law or the Sunshine Law. It provides a constitutional and statutory right of notice of and access to governmental proceedings of public boards or commissions at both the state and local levels in the state of Florida. If you can go to the next slide. Back a number of years ago, the residents of the state of Florida, the voters, the electors, voted to amend the Florida Constitution to add this Article 1, Section 24B. Florida, like the federal government and other states, has a constitution that sets the governmental parameters for how the operations of the government is supposed to take place. And then the Florida statutes implement the Florida Constitution. So this amendment was added to the Florida Constitution a number of years ago. And it says and we'll go into a discussion about what these phrases mean. All meetings of any collegial public body of a special district at which official acts are to be taken or at which public business of such body is to be transacted or discussed shall be open and noticed to the public, except with respects to meetings exempted pursuant to this section or specifically closed by the Constitution. And what's important is, and we'll talk about it later on further, the term meetings, collegial body, special district official acts, notice of public meetings. Those are all important items that come into play when you're looking at the implementation of the Sunshine Law. If you can go on to the next slide, the legislature adopted this statute, Section 286.011 Florida statutes, that implements in part the Florida constitutional provision on the Sunshine Law. And again, you'll see the similar phrase, all meetings of any board or commission of any agency or authority, and it goes on to say of any county, municipal corporation, which are cities, or political subdivision, are except as otherwise provided in the Constitution, are declared to be public meetings open to the public at all times. And no resolution, rule, or formal action shall be considered binding, except as taken or made at such meeting, and the board or commission must provide reasonable notice of all such meetings. So let's go on next to the Florida statutes, and then it goes on to say the minutes of a meeting of any such board shall be promptly recorded. And when they mean recorded, they mean written down and then maintained and open to public inspection. So if you go to the next slide, we have three basic requirements. All meetings of public boards or commissions must be open to the public. And this includes meetings of special districts and the community development district, such as the Gateway Services Community Development District, is a special district in the state of Florida. And its charter is outlined in the Florida statutes. You'll hear it, Chapter 190, and it's established either by governor and cabinet or by a local ordinance. So all meetings have to be open to the public. Reasonable notice, these are general requirements, and there are specific requirements applicable to community development districts that we will talk about later on. Reasonable notice of such meetings must be given, and minutes of the meetings must be taken and promptly recorded. So what constitutes a meeting? The courts have construed the term meeting. It's two or more members from the same board or commission or committee and then convene to discuss some matter which will foreseeably come before that board or commission or committee for action, then the Sunshine Law applies. You are an advisory committee to the Board of Supervisors of the Gateway Services Community Development District. And the courts and the Attorney General of the state of Florida have opined that advisory committees, because you have the ability to make recommendations and you are an integral part of the decision-making process, the meetings of advisory committees are subject to the Sunshine Law. Now, when I'm in the bottom there's a little note, it says recurring items, issues, conservative approach. The phrase in there says, which will foreseeably come before that board or commission for action. We take a very conservative approach to that because something you talk about today, I bet you my bottom dollar, you'll be talking about it again in the future. But it would reasonably, foreseeably come before you again. So I always advise my boards, we always advise our boards and committee clients that any item, any issue concerning your charge, that's Parks and Recreation and involving Gateway, any of those matters, you cannot discuss it with any other committee members. You cannot communicate with any other committee members on that matter, except at a noticed public meeting of the committee, or any other noticed public meeting where the committee is indicated as being available. We'll get into that. That's a very conservative approach we take. Types of boards. that the sunshine law is applicable to, again, quoting from the statute, any board or commission of any state agency or authority, or any agency or authority of any county, municipal corporation, or political subdivision. Political subdivision in this context includes community development districts. So as I mentioned before, it applies to elected and appointed boards, including special districts and community development districts, including advisory boards and committees. And we give some examples about the CDD board is elected or appointed, and the committees are appointed by the board. Advisory board committee examples, a city tourism board, or in this case, a city CDD parks or community committee. They're advisory and subject to the sunshine law. The next slide, items that are generally outside the scope, and again, generally, because everything's fact specific. If the board of the district, board of supervisors creates a pure fact-finding committee, that's not subject to the sunshine law. But a fact-finding committee cannot make any recommendations. Otherwise, the sunshine law comes into play.
Thank you.
Staff committees were not delegated
Thank you.
decision-making,
No worries. Thanks, Hal.
as opposed to fact-finding. Generally outside the scope, and again, a lot of times it's general, and exceptions sometimes swallow the rule. Private organizations, except in certain circumstances, if a private organization is created by a public entity, say a county establishes a corporation to hold property, or if a private organization is delegated the public entity's governmental function, or is an integral part of the public entity's decision-making. This doesn't really apply to y'all, but it does apply sometimes to private organizations that are delegated the county, cities, districts, authority. Interestingly enough, the courts are not subject to the sunshine law. And even more interesting, the state legislature, who makes the rules, adopts the statutes to implement the Constitution. So again, within the scope, officials, also within the scope of the sunshine law are members elect. And Mrs. Pankow was a member elect when she was elected to the board. And at that point in time, she could not have any communications with the board members that she would be serving with, even though she had not yet come into office and been sworn in. And incumbent candidates. Outside the scope are non-incumbent political candidates. If we go on to the next slide, interaction, members of different boards or committees. The sunshine law generally does not apply if the interaction is between officials who are members of different entities or different committees of an entity, unless one of the officials has been delegated power to act on behalf of the committee. By way of example, if a member of the Parks and Recreation Committee wants to talk separately with a member of the Pelican Reserve Advisory Committee, they can, because it's two different committees. If a member of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee wants to talk to a board member, a board of supervisors, they can. You cannot, though, talk to a chain of members of the other committee or a chain of the supervisors of the board. We'll get into that later on. It's called either daisy chaining or some other. In other words, you cannot talk to, say, Supervisor Walsh. And in talking to Supervisor Walsh about a park and recreation matter, say, I was talking to Supervisor Banks and he told me you can't do that because that's doing indirectly, which cannot be done directly. So if we go on to the slide number 14, I think. Meeting with staff, sunshine law does not apply to meetings with staff unless the staff is being used as a liaison between board or committee members. Again, if you were to go talk to Chelsea about a matter involving their committee, then you cannot, Chelsea cannot tell another committee member what you told her. So that's, because again, the idea is to try to avoid all evasive devices. What types of meetings are covered? Meetings of other boards or committees when you're a visitor? No, unless there are two or more officials of the same board or committee and there is interaction. And if so, it must be noticed and accessible to the public. Meetings of other boards or committees when you're a member? No, unless there are two or more officials of the same board or committee. And if so, must be noticed and accessible to the public. And one note on that, whenever and in the notice for the meeting of the Board of Supervisors, there's a note in there that says meeting of members of committees established by the district may be in attendance at the supervisor meetings. And the idea for that is at times there may be two members of your committee present at a Board of Supervisors meeting. And there might be interaction. So we're telling the public hey, this is a board of supervisors meeting, but also be aware of the fact members of the Park and Recreation Committee, there may be one or more present and they may interact. Same with the Pelican Reserve Advisory Committee, Reserve, they may have two people present. Community forums, are they meetings that are covered and you have to be worried about the sunshine law? No. Again, unless you have interaction of two or more people from the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee. And
Tony.
you're talking about Parks and Recreation. Did you just lose your quorum?
Yes, we did.
Okay, I thought I saw somebody leave.
They're not taking any action today, so I think we should be okay.
We'll treat this as sort of like a workshop now, basically. No decision making, no recommendations, just listening
Yes.
from this point. So social interaction, again, it's not an issue unless there's interaction or discussing items that may reasonably be expected to come before this committee. Anything dealing with Parks and Rec, the fun park, the commons, the pool. You cannot, at a social function, talk with any other committee member about that. Or if you're talking to a resident and they say, hey, I was talking to Mrs. Smith and she told me that you said, or that another committee member said such and such, you need to say, please do not tell me what any other committee member said outside of a public meeting of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee. So another area you need to be concerned about or be cautious of, what type of activities are prohibited meetings? Again, the courts and the Attorney General have interpreted the statute broadly because of the intended purpose to provide the opportunity for the public to observe what transpires and what goes into the decision-making that affects the residents of the state of Florida. You cannot email or have text messages or any other written communications to, from, or among the committee members. Social media posts with responses or interaction. If someone was to post, one of your committee members post on Facebook, an item concerning the parks and recreation issues and Gateway, you cannot respond to that. They constitute meetings under the Sunshine Law. Fact-finding trips, the Board of Supervisors cannot take fact-finding trips, but the advisory committees can, but there's some cautionary notes involved in that. During recesses, you can't have private discussions on district matters with other committee members. And during the committee meetings, you can't have inaudible discussions between committee members that the public cannot hear. The Sebastian City Council and the city of Sebastian, Florida got in trouble for that, where council members were sort of whispering to each other off mic or turning off their mics during the council meeting. Now, if they were talking about football game unrelated to their role as council members or not involving any city business, okay. But the problem is if it's inaudible, you can't tell. That poses a problem. So I'll generally go over the exemptions because most of them don't apply to you, they apply to the board. There are some exemptions to the public meetings, public being available. Investigative meetings under certain circumstances, attorney board meetings to discuss pending litigation, they're closed door. There are some other examples of exemptions from the public meeting. Any portion of a meeting that would reveal a security or fire safety system, or and that's a spin-off from 9/11, so that the ability for those who don't want to reveal the district's facilities or residents do not know about security or fire safety system plans. And then also another exemption involving negotiations with vendors. Closed door meetings, again, it doesn't really apply to y'all, it applies to the board. Attorney privilege communications, it's a very narrow exemption where we can request, advise the board we need guidance on litigation involving litigation expenses and involving settlement opportunities, but involves pending litigation. Notice still has to be provided. The entire session is recorded by a certified court reporter. Transcript is prepared and maintained confidential until litigation is over. And very narrow list of board, the attorneys, the chief executive officer, and the court reporter. Nobody else, no other staff, no other consultants. So it's very difficult. And very strictly construed too. Notice of procedure, again, it's important for the public to know what is intended to be considered or planned to be considered by the committee. So there is an agenda, there's a notice, and the notice for the committees can be posted on the district's website. The notices for the board meetings have to be advertised in a newspaper. We can do it once a year, quarterly, monthly, and special meetings have to be in the paper. And there might be some other meetings that need to be specially noticed. But this one, again, and this again is just like a little knock, this cartoon. All those in favor of what we discussed in our email thread at Larry's son's birthday party, say aye. I mean, that's an obvious violation of the Sunshine Law, so it's really not a public meeting. Notice of procedure, notice and agenda. As I mentioned before, the Sunshine Law just requires reasonable notice. And for committees, our guidance and advice is at a minimum, post on the district's website. And Chelsea, I think you do what, 7 days in advance, just to be on the cautious side?
Yes.
And then email blasts to community organizations or master associations, get the word out there, post at the district door, and that's as to the committees. There is specific notice as to the board meetings of the CDD. And that's, again, that's for the board. An agenda is not really required generally by the Sunshine Law, but as to community development districts, another statute, an agenda of each board meeting workshop has to be posted at least 7 days in advance. And our advice also is post agendas for committees at least 7 days in advance. Again, the idea is to let the public know what topics you will be talking about, so they have an opportunity to provide input, ask questions, or ask for documents. Another important aspect of notice and procedure is location. The Sunshine Law requires that the facilities where the meetings are held, we cannot have meetings in facilities that discriminate or unreasonably restrict access. That's prohibited. For an example, if you anticipate a large crowd at a meeting and the room that you typically hold the meetings is not large enough to hold the crowd, arrangements must be made to provide a way for people to attend. That can happen remotely or a larger venue, and both have been utilized by Gateway. As to the community development districts, there's another requirement for the board. The meetings have to be held in a public meeting when available within the district, in a county courthouse of the county, or in the building county accessible to the public. One other aspect about accessibility that's important, because at times the venue that might be best for the meeting might be in a gated community where the roads are owned by a private organization, not the CDD. In that instance, all members of the public who want to attend the meeting must be allowed to go through the gates to get to that meeting. Again, that's in the instance where you have no other venue choice but to go to a private property behind gates. We covered this earlier briefly. What if a board member or committee member cannot attend a meeting? There's an old Attorney General's opinion that talks about, and Chelsea mentioned it before, that once a physical quorum is established, the participation of an absent member by telephone or other interactive electronic device or technology or remote access is permissible when such absence is due to exceptional or extraordinary circumstances. And wonderfully so, the courts have never interpreted what that means about extraordinary or exceptional circumstances. So it's left to the good discretion of the committee or board. Next, minutes. Minutes must be promptly recorded. That means written or typed up. It can either be verbatim or a summary of the discussions and then made available to public for inspection. What are the failures to comply with the Sunshine Law? Intentional violations can be criminal penalties. You can go to jail. You can be fined. Also, removal from office. You can also have non-criminal infractions where you don't go to jail, but you can get a fine. Attorney's fees may be subject. Attorney's fees. Civil actions for injunctive or declaratory relief against the governmental body or even against the committee members, and actions that violate the Sunshine Law may be set aside as being void. It's called void ab initio from the beginning. So that it's important that all actions taken even at the recommending stage, the advisory stage, that is your committee, if you all want to recommend, for example, a vendor to enter into a contract to provide construction services or provide materials, goods, and services, then that recommendation, that action needs to be compliant with the Sunshine Law. Or else someone could say you didn't comply with the Sunshine Law, and that first stage was void and the contract is void, which would require the district to go back through the public hearing and public meeting process. So again, that gets back to failure to comply. One course could be, one impact could be invalidity of the action. And at times it can be corrected, but independently take final action in a publicly noticed meeting in the sunshine. Newspapers love to find governmental officials, committee members, elected officials in violation of the sunshine law, because newspapers say we are the beacon of light shining into the darkness, and they will try to find ways to put public officials on the front page if there's an issue involving sunshine law violation, as the mayor of Cape Coral did back about a year and a half or 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. We don't want that coverage. You don't want that coverage. Other examples are in the PowerPoint. And the one that's interesting is before we talked about you can have social interactions with members of the committee, but do not talk about anything that involving Parks and Recreation, which is your charge. In Jacksonville, there were 4 of the 5 city council members were sitting in a booth at a bar. And some resident came by and saw them sitting there and took a selfie with the 4 council members in the background and sent it around to the world and said, I wonder what they're talking about, basically. Now, the council members said, no, we weren't talking about any city business. We were just shooting the breeze. But the resident said, no, I heard you all talking about another city council member. So again, the cautionary tale is it's unfortunate that people try to play gotcha, but that's at times it's better to avoid the appearance of impropriety. When you're talking with other committee members in a social setting, just be aware of the fact some people may try to think you're doing insidious items. So make sure you keep any conversations, any communications to matters not involved with your committee. People may be overhearing your conversation. There are a number of resources that we have, and then this is just a little cartoon at the end. If you ever have any questions, Chelsea or Laura or George will give you our cell phone numbers, our office numbers, our email addresses. Please feel free to call us. Again, we take a very conservative approach on the sunshine law because of its implications. Now, just real briefly on the public records law, we don't have a PowerPoint today for that, but any materials you receive involving your position as a member of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee become public records. And Chelsea, are you going to be giving them email addresses for the district email address?
Yep,
Pardon?
we're gonna go over some housekeeping items next.
Okay, and the reason for that is you do not want anybody trying to root around your personal computer to get emails involving the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. So that any emails you get, or if you get them on your personal email account because people know you for years, forward them to Chelsea and ask the individuals to always use your district assigned email address. It's really important. Again, it's to maintain that I'll call it a firewall, a dividing line between your personal emails on your server and the emails involving your role as a committee member. And recognize any emails you send out involving your position as a committee member are public records. Documents you receive, if you're handed a sheet of paper by a resident out as you're walking through Publix, and they say, hey, can you bring this up at the next committee meeting? This is an important matter. I want you to look at this for consider for Parks and Recreation. That's a public record. It's given to you in your official capacity as a member of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee. Our guidance is to send that to Chelsea or George or Laura for safekeeping and say, I received this from a resident. Please, that way you don't have to maintain the records. Laura is the custodian of public records. I'm correct, Chelsea? Laura still is? For the district. So that any public records request you want the public records request or to go through Laura. She's familiar with the law. She's familiar with when to request guidance for exemptions and redactions. And you don't want to be in a position of guessing what is compliant with the public records law to provide or not. So anything you get in your role, if you get something in the mail unsolicited from a furniture vendor that does Parks and Recreation furniture and says, hey, I understand you're on this committee, give that to Chelsea, give that to Laura. Recognize any communications you prepare also in your role as a committee member are public record. And always provide a copy to Chelsea and Laura so that they are the custodians. they focus on complying with the statutory requirements. I know we went that pretty quickly. Anybody have any questions?
Can we get that in writing? It's Maria.
I'm sorry?
Can you get the sunshine law writing? You presented the slides. It's so hard to remember everything.
It's on our website, and it is part of the link in the packet, so.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it's in the agenda. I appreciate Chelsea putting in the agenda packet because that made it easier for me to bring up also. It's on the hyperlink for this topic. And again, any questions, feel free to call us. We always appreciate that. And again, we take a very conservative approach. We don't want to see anybody on TV except extolling the virtues of their role as a committee member.
So just final comments on this. No offense, Tony, this is probably the most boring thing that you guys are gonna do on this committee, but it's one of the most important things that you're gonna need to abide by on this committee. But you cannot meet with each other or discuss any topics outside of a publicly noticed meeting, so essentially in this room. There's no daisy chaining, so I talked to Sarah, who talked to John, and he told me that, you know, whoever was gonna vote on this, cannot email each other. All email communications have to go through Georgia, and or Keith or his designee, depending on, and again, this is new to us, so we're trying to figure out who's going to be the perfect liaison for your committee. But when in doubt, send an email to Georgia, and we have a customercare@gatewaydistrict.org email that is like our just general inbox for anything and everything. When in doubt, shoot me a call, shoot me a text, shoot me an email if you have a question about anything. So that's really the most important takeaway from Tony's presentation. So
Yeah,
with that,
thank you.
Tony, thank you so much for.
Well, thank you.
doing
Just
this
one more
today.
comment, Chelsea. Thank you. Gave me a thought. What you also may get at times, residents may email all the committee members at one time.
No.
And so never hit reply to all.
We do
Okay.
have one question, Tony.
I'm sorry?
One question. Just make sure you can speak into that mic right there. Is the red button up? Make sure it's up.
Okay, now it's up. Tony, this is Susan Vale. Quick question. You mentioned statutes for CDDs. What's the statutes for the CDDs that we follow? And a second part of that is, what are they for construction?
Well, Chapter 190 in the Florida statutes is the charter for the Community Development District. There are a number of other statutes that the legislature has decided to sprinkle among the statute books and that govern how the CDD operates, how it performs its audits and some other roles and functions. But the basic charter is Chapter 190.
Okay.
And,
Okay.
and when you mention construction, I'm not sure if I understand the question.
Well, it used to be a long time ago when I worked with the school district that we followed strict guidelines by statutes. And I'm sure that we do that as well here in Gateway. So are all those rules going to be in 190?
No, the district has adopted, the board has adopted, excuse me, a meeting protocol with regards to how the committee meetings are established. But from the perspective of if the district wishes to undertake construction contracts and construction projects, regardless of the nature, there is a separate statute that governs when competitive solicitation has to occur, for example, and how that occurs. If the district wants to hire an engineer other than the district engineer to do certain work, at certain times we have to go out for proposals. So there's, I know that the legislature has created many chapters in the Florida statutes in the K-12 code that talks about how you operate school boards and school systems. And there's rules also. So they provided a little bit of greater level of specificity. But some of the basic fundamentals for the district are subject to the Sunshine Law, subject to the Public Records Law, subject to certain requirements for competitive solicitation, and subject to certain requirements for competitive solicitation for engineering services, maintenance services, and purchasing of goods and services. But there's no, and then the district has adopted rules of procedure to indicate how it will handle certain matters, engage in certain actions.
Okay, so.
General rule of thumb is CCNA, but we do have some, over the years, the board has adopted some other design, construction policies.
Okay, I just want to understand it because we might be talking about.
General rule of
Prices
thumb,
and stuff.
CCNA
Okay.
is what I would.
All right.
Well, that, you know, yeah, and what that is, that's a statute that said, if you have a planning or studying activity of more than 35,000, or if you have a construction activity of a certain dollar, over a certain dollar amount, and you're going to be using surveyors, architects, engineers, mappers, landscape architects, you need to engage in a competitive solicitation process where the first round is purely qualifications based. And then there's a ranking of the top three. Hopefully you get at least three. And then the board negotiates with the top ranked organization on compensation. So that's a little oddity for professional consultant, certain professional consultants where they negotiate a qualifications based ranking, then you negotiate with the highest ranked firm. And then if the negotiations for compensation are unsuccessful with the highest ranked qualified firm, you go to the second one. Construction, it's a different matter. If construction is over almost about $500,000, we have to go out to competitive solicitation through bids and advertising. Maintenance services, there's a threshold for that also. I don't have that in front of me. So there are certain thresholds where we have to engage in competitive solicitation. But there's a lot of that sort of ad hoc that's maybe not as I'll call it as structured, maybe the school would. Auditors, they have to go through an audit selection process outlined in the statutes.
Okay, when we get to it.
Any
Thank
other-
you.
Any other questions for Tony? All right, thank you, Tony.
Yeah, and again, I was just mentioning about never reply to all, please.
Yes.
When you see other committee members on something, and you know, that's a dangerous area. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chelsea.
No problem. Thanks, Tony. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
A couple housekeeping items, since you all are new. The plan is for this committee as of right now, but you set your own agendas. So we plugged in some of the items that are on here for items for discussion. But moving forward, as of right now, the board only gave direction for this on the fun park. That is subject to change in the future. Again, pending the Board of Supervisors approval, because again, you're an advisory committee to them. That's why we put a couple of these fun park items on here. Moving forward, you know, you guys will set your own agendas with the blessing of the board. But for now, your task is the fun park. Because we lost our quorum, you guys won't be able to make a recommendation or take any action today. But what we can do is we can go over, I can turn it over to Keith to go over these two items. Before we delve into that, as of right now, this meeting is a recurring monthly meeting at this time and date. The last Tuesday of every month, subject to change pending availability of this room. So if this time and date doesn't work for you guys as a committee, that again, you guys can change that. Staff liaison, kind of like what Carol is providing as from the board liaison. We don't, we're here to assist. We're not here to do your work. That's why this committee was formed. So if you need information or where to find something, that's where we come in. We're not here to take direction or orders from the committee. Really, it's, all right, you guys have an idea. Let's take the fun park. If you guys like taking Carol's idea, you guys want a slide and you recommend to the Board of Supervisors a slide. From that point on, okay, you recommended a slide. From the staff perspective, we go come up with a specific slide and then and make the action come to fruition. Because there's a lot of from the behind the scenes, there's purchase orders, there's contracts, there's all that fun stuff that goes along with it. So this is an advisory committee in nature, but we're here to assist any way we can. this committee is really to, Tricia earlier asked why this committee, never formed before. I can't really speak to that other than maybe Parks and Rec wasn't necessarily the top priority for the district. Understandably so, we have a massive enterprise fund with water and sewer and irrigation and all of that. But there's been a kind of turning of the tides, I'd say, and especially with, we're trying to go after a bond that hopefully we'll get here in the next month or two. That'll help to provide some additional funding for some improvements. But we have the staff with the knowledge to support you all. And before we jump into these next items, I think we should go around and just perhaps give a little bit about yourself and maybe your background, or maybe why you wanted to participate on this committee. So, Keith, you want to go? Why you wanted to participate? Voluntold. You just want to tell a little bit your name and a little bit about your background. It does.
Yeah, so my name is Keith Riddle. That's my full name. I'm the Public Works Director for Gateway.
Very soft-spoken.
Sorry. I keep getting reminded of that. So I started with Gateway in September. My background has been construction and engineering for the last 32 years. So I've been working in the private sector my whole career, though. So this is a lot different for me, learning the meeting procedures, just like you guys are having to learn. So that's my background, and I'm here to help with that, whatever I can. Maria, you want to go?
My name is Maria Logotides. Okay. I am new resident. I've been here about 2 years at Magnolia Lakes, and by profession, I work for a major carrier. I am a trainer and supervisor, and I decided to get involved because I think we're lacking recreation areas, and I think we all have an invested interest to make this place better for everyone.
My name is Carlos Cifarelli. I also live in Magnolia Lakes. I just moved here about 2 months ago. So, and I have little children, so I figured, I want to get them involved in different activities. And like she said, things are lacking, it seems like, a little bit. So I figured I would give it a shot, be more involved in the community.
My name is Susan Vale, and I recently moved, well, I've been here a year, but I'm a returning resident, and I was in the area 20 years ago. I am a retired construction manager, so I understand how to build things. I've worked with developers. I've done private and public side. So I've worked for the school district. I've worked for big colleges in Houston. And when they were having the presentation about the bond and the funding, I had 1,000 questions. And I just thought if I could help, because I have a lot of background, probably more logistically, that I would like to, serve my time and give back to the community. It's time. I can do that.
Robert, you want to go?
Sure. Yeah, sure. My name's Robert Vertrees. I've been a Gateway resident since moving down here in 2011. My kids were 6 at the time. They're now 16, so they've basically been raised here in Gateway. We have been involved in some form as players, coaches, referees, and organizers of Gateway Rec Soccer. The travel soccer teams have practiced up at Sherman Park and at JetBlue, the Gateway Flag Football, Gateway High School. So a few years ago, I was involved in a school board committee and kind of enjoyed doing that work for a couple of years. And now when I saw this opportunity, given how often I'm out at the fun park, at the Sherman Soccer Park, running on the trail behind with the electrical wires, I figured I need to get involved and help out as much as I can. So,
Thank you. I'm Chelsea O'Reilly, district manager. I started here last May. I come from government background. I used to work for Fort Myers Beach for 13 years. Some would say that I'm muddling up the processes and procedures and making it more government oriented here. Being a CDD, we have a lot less strings than a typical municipality, but I'm so accustomed to procedures and policies and hoping to implement those, and that's truly why you see one of the two items here is fun park policies, usage, and procedures, because I had $1 for every time I'd heard, well, it's because we've always done it this way, or, you know, that's just how we've operated. Well, okay, is that memorialized anywhere? Have officially board adopted policies and procedures. If we don't, okay, let's get them adopted. How, you know, what is the intent? What was the, I mean, I don't know if you guys know the background, but Gateway as a whole was, we'll call it, incorporated in 1986. The CDD was in 86, and it was basically WCI, which is Lennar, built out the community, and then when they built out the community, they turned over a lot of the assets over to the district. And so since then, there's, as you can see, there's really been no improvements made since 86. And that just wasn't only for Parks and Rec, it was for everything across the board, because the intent was to keep the non-ad valorem assessment low. Ultimately, that hit the developer in their own pocket if they wanted additional improvements. So this committee, we came up with this idea, considering a couple years back there was a park plan that was put out by the district. The district had contracted with Holmontes to come up with a master park plan for the Commons, which is up there by the pool. It died horribly by the community. Again, this is what I've heard. And so I come from, I worked at a rec center growing up. I worked at the pool. I've worked at historic. From my perspective, with the Parks and Rec committee and amenities that the district provides, is we should not be competing with the private market. If your HOA has tennis courts, why should we have tennis courts? There's no need for the resident to be paying twice. And so that's my own personal perspective. Hoping you guys can shed some light and some input on some of our amenities, this fun park being the first one. Have you guys all been to the fun park? So it's a little tucked away piece of land that the district owns right behind the Gateway Trinity Lutheran Church. He's pulling it up here on the map. So we've got a small parking lot, some grassy area, volleyball, sand volleyball court, a single basketball hoop, and then a swing set and playground. So it's my understanding, just to kind of give you guys a little bit historical from what we've heard from staff who've been here for a while, is you'll see that there's some very close neighbors and homes, that there's been some riffraff back going on after dark, you know, people playing basketball on a basketball court at a rec park. But the neighbors didn't like that because it would often occur after dark. And so there was some physical alterations to, there used to be 2 hoops and now there's only 1 because they didn't want games being played. The hoop was shortened. It was reduced in height from official height because they wanted to deter folks from that were tall and playing. I will tell you right now, we do have some issues and some maintenance issues with the playground, which we're working on repairing. But this fun park doesn't necessarily look too fun. So with that, I will turn it over to Keith to kind of go over the playground equipment, and then kind of just general discussion about the policies, the usage, and procedures perhaps moving forward. Again, we can't take action, but you guys can definitely weigh in or push it to your next meeting and find further there.
So Chelsea summarized the park itself pretty closely, but I want to just bring to your attention the playground equipment itself. So right now, the playground equipment is in pretty bad shape. It's in need of repairs. There are parts ordered for those repairs right now. With playground equipment, they have to come from a specialty provider or vendor, and they have to be installed by a specialty provider. So we are working on those replacement parts, but we do see that it's going to be an ongoing maintenance issue, this set. So that is something, if you guys could take a look at this playground set specifically, and on your own time, of course, when you reconvene, you can discuss the playground set and if this is the best place that it's suited for. As Chelsea mentioned, our commons area by the pool, all that empty land is Gateway property. There will be an administrative building built there in the next 2 years. The future plan for that entire property is hopefully to have all the amenities in one location there. So that is something to consider as well when you're evaluating this.
Real quick, just because it looks like we have somebody else on the call. We don't typically, well, each committee is different. You can choose to engage with the public if they have a question, but it appears that we have a Bill Dorian online that has raised his hand and would like to speak. If it's okay that I allow him to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm sorry to intrude. I just wanted to let you know that I actually have signed up to be part of this advisory committee, and it was going in front of the board, I believe, on Thursday. So we'll see if they like my name and my qualifications. But I guess just sitting here listening, I won't interrupt again. As kind of a thought here, when you start talking about the fun park, what are the parameters around this for an advisory board? Is there a budgetary constraints because the group could come back and say, well, we want to knock it down and build everything new? Or is there, what are the parameters that this group will be faced with in how they go about the review process and what their actual recommendations are?
So this group does not have the authority to spend money. Ultimately, your recommendations would have to go in front of the board for their final approval in the expenditure. But as of right now, with this committee just getting started, they wanted to give this committee the opportunity to weigh in on the usage, the current usage of the fun park, future usage, if any, and what, one of the tasks, Bill, I think to your point or your concern is kind of what happened back with that previous plan was everything was thrown in and they said that they wanted the best of the best of the best. Well, with that comes a very large price tag, and I think that scared the community. I could see the board directing this committee to come up with a plan of costs, project it out. You've got a construction manager here that I'm sure would love to volunteer and take on that type of thing, volunteering. But these are just, this is the first committee meeting. I don't want to scare anybody off. Hopefully Bill can be nominated and we can have a full committee at your next meeting. But right now everything's up in the air. The board, it seems like, didn't want to restrict you all. But they said, hey, let's give them the fun park and see where they go with it. So.
I have a question as well, based on what you mentioned before. Question. You mentioned about the other property by the, and a two-part question actually. Is this the location of the current park, is this where it's going to stay? A. B, is it possible for it to be relocated, and is part of this area available? Since they have the issues, the neighbors intervening and all that.
The answer to all your questions is yes. The park could be moved to here. We will share the original master plan for this space with you guys. I'll try to get that before the next meeting so you can see what it looked like. This was a thing that happened that Chelsea mentioned that got shot down before we were here. Yes, so that is a possibility to review. Yeah, So right here is the property. This is what we call the commons. So this corner right here is where the new administration building is going to go, and it's going to be. What's the term they use for that? It's like it's an L. It's a delta. Yeah, it's like an L. But yeah, so that's where the building's going to go. All the rest of the space is unplanned.
How large a space is that?
15 acres on the entire site.
How many acres is that?
It's 5,000 square foot, I think. Yeah, with parking. It's gonna be, if you look at my
With the
curve,
parking lot
right.
included.
If I
Okay.
follow my cursor, it's kind of like right here. There, boom, that's the building, and then here's the parking lot. So the cars will come in through here and travel through here. There'll be a main gate here, and then you'll get into. So aside from this parking lot building, all this space. Yeah, fun park. So back to the playground equipment, I told you it's in bad shape, so if you guys can please look at that, and what you see for the future for that specific site and the equipment, and then the park as a whole. Is it being used and its best potential?
What about all that extra open space? Is that owned by Gateway also, or is that
It
owned
is.
by that?
It's owned by Gateway.
How many, what is the acreage on this?
I'm saying it's about 5 acres, I think, counting our parking and amenities. Yeah.
So with the complaints of the people who live back there, is there any way that we recommend, like, oh, put up a fence or something like that?
You can recommend anything.
Right.
Everything's on the table.
And I'll only just talk about budget a little bit too. So we're bound by a budget each year through our fiscal year. It doesn't mean that if you have a great idea and it costs $1 million, we don't have $1 million in the budget. I'll tell you that right now. But it doesn't mean we can't do it down the road or do it in phases. So, yeah. And we can budget for it if it gets approved.
I'm super sensitive to budget because I know you only have a limited amount, and if we can design anything we want and it can be super cool. Definitely phasing, and then what's the most important thing for the community? Is there access to a community outreach to actually do a survey?
Yeah.
That's what was done last time.
Okay.
And there are a lot of, how do I say this nicely? At the time, there was no real tracking of how or where the responses came from. And if we were to move forward on some type of survey, I would like for it to be a lot more structured. And I don't know, Laura may know, she's our tech guru, limiting the number of responses, if it's one per household. I don't know if there's technology out there for that type of thing. But from what I hear, because again, this occurred prior to our time, it was kind of pushed down the throat of the community. And of course, anytime, at least me too, you push anything down my throat, I'm not going to like it. So that was the response that was had.
Yeah, we need to be, if we're going to have great ideas, we need to give the why. I think we talked about that in the past, and there's probably really good reasons. You all see issues that are important for your families, and we've got to craft the why so people understand exactly this is what we are thinking, this is why we thought this way, this is the best solution because of these parameters.
Well, there is a lot of, I will say firsthand, there's a lot of historical knowledge here between board members, between committees, between HOA presidents. Heck, I'm sure you could go knock on some of these neighbors' doors that abut this property and get some historical background on the usage and things like that. Their perspective may be different than yours in Magnolia. So yes, there's opportunities to do some type of questionnaire or testing.
Okay, that's a little bit down the road, I think. I don't think we're quite ready for that today.
piggybacking on that, I would like to ask if there's opportunity to check on the demographics as a whole. Meaning in Gateway, out of X amount of thousands of households, how many children under this age? The adults, how many seniors? So if there's something created, it's created to serve to something for everyone. And of course, I think that's going to attract more people, because if I say I want to spend $5 million on a playground for kids up to 10, that's going to certainly exclude a lot of people. So they will not be willing so much to agree or participate. B, I agree with what you say, but I've served on a as a treasurer in a nonprofit organization for 5 years. It's a church, and I know that if you ask 1 million people that will not take the time to research or educate themselves, you're going to get 1 million Wahoo answers. So slippery slope. I agree, but it's a slippery slope also.
And also too, how many of these communities have great amenities already? If I lived in a community, our community has nothing.
Nothing.
So if I live somewhere that has all these great amenities, I would say, I don't want anything extra. Because why am I going to pay for it when I already have it and I already paid for it?
And that's my philosophy as well. And that could be a good research point for somebody on this committee. We have a list of all of the HOA presidents that we could tell you. I will tell you, Pelican Preserve is part of the GSCDD, but they do not pay for these recreational components because they have a slew of them in their own, and they receive no direct benefit from them. So with regards to your ask about demographics, the 2020 census data is out there. It's very educational. Actually, if you type in our area code, I've spent quite a bit of time looking at that as we consider moving forward with our public information and how we disseminate that to our community. Just 50-50 is really what our community is. It's retirees and or young families. We're really right down the middle. We've got quite a few schools in the area as well. So it is, and we have a very highly educated community as well. That was something else and our median income is pretty high compared to others. So there's a lot of really good information out there, and if that's something, if you guys want to take it upon yourselves to look it up, or say, hey, I'll bring back the census data at the next meeting, you guys are more than welcome to do that as well.
I think that's about it for the playground equipment. So I think you guys understand the task there at hand. The next item was the fun park policies and usage and the procedures. Do you want to shelve this one to the next meeting? Or?
You can just touch on it.
Yeah. Good. Let's see how I forgot to bring this up. How did I do?
But if you can hear me, we need Annie on the.
So just a little background on what you're seeing here. This is our agenda management, or not our agenda management. This is what you'll see when you guys submit a topic for an agenda item. And Georgia will be putting those. Well, you'll send, and since you're the chair, you would send her a topic for the agenda. Georgia would put it in for your next meeting, and this is what it'll look like.
There's a form that essentially asks you what's your requested motion, why is it, fill in all of that information. And then of course, if staff has an item that we want to.
So here's the item. Right now, the park is just open for daylight hours only. So you guys could look into that and come up with a policy for that. If maybe there's no change needed, whatever it may be, and then just standardize the policy and the expectations and the usage are clear for the space. The misuse, I wasn't here, but what I've heard, misuse was primarily the basketball court. It was a full court with a full size hoops, and even after the lights were shut off at night, kids were coming up with their cars and parking and not playing under headlights. So I can imagine that would have been loud. So I understand that. But so at some point they took down one of the hoops. And then signage. Yeah, if there's any signage that you guys see might be needed to help, clarify the use, things like that.
Is that their only complaint, was their misuse was just playing?
As
In the
far
dark and stuff?
as
too,
far as
not
I
like
know,
drinking
that's
or-
all I've heard. Yeah. Well, I mean, with nighttime headlight games, it comes partying and probably more than just basketball, I'm assuming.
So there were no other unlawful transactions we're aware of.
I'm not aware of. Yeah.
So we do pay additional dollars to the sheriff to random patrols of all of our parks and rec amenities. We recently had some issues at the soccer complex with that property being destroyed. But this one's kind of off the beaten path, so I know that it's there. It's kind of hard to find. You guys did get a new sign for on Gateway Boulevard, right? So ultimately, just again, looking for your guys' input. You'll take whatever your recommendation, if any, is to the Board of Supervisors. And then, do you guys have any questions? Pretty straightforward. Like I said, the board only gave direction for you guys to give them Fun Park. That could expand to soccer complex in the future, or the common, or the dog park, any or other parks and rec.
Is there any money set aside just for that? For the fun park? Or is it just?
If there is, it's nominal. Very nominal. Which again, we're getting ready to go into our budgeting process here in the next couple months. And so I'm sure the board will be looking to provide funds that would be tied to projects. In the bond, we did some improvements to be done. I will tell you, I won't bore you too much, but the county has about $300,000 and some of park impact fees that are allocated to Gateway. There are strings with park impact fees because you have to provide essentially like a new service or a new amenity, a new attraction. It can't be for the repair of something or the replacement of something. Which that has been sitting. The biggest caveat, which I think why the board has deterred from using those money in the past, is it has to be a public facility open to the public. So the board has made a very clear stance with the Commons that they do not want to allow non-Gateway residents, and that's been a pretty firm stance. But the soccer complex was created with park impact fees back in the day. There's only about 350,000, I think. So, and one of the things we did just receive the land, we call it the FPL easement, that linear park that Robert was referring to earlier. You own that now, so there could be some opportunity. Park with the approval from FPL, and that we do there, we have to get FPL an agreement from them, but that's also something. I've given you guys a lot of information today.
I want to just go back a little bit. If the project by the pool happened, how far out do you think that is? And I'm not holding you to it, but I'm trying to gauge, well, how well do we fix these things, these, I'm gonna call them toys in the fun park? Is it a repair or is it a replacement? And what is the duration in your past experience? How long does one of these little play things last? Does it last 5, 10, 15 years? And I don't want to double bend, but you know where I'm going, right? And you don't have to, like, I'm not saying you're going to tell us that the pool is going to be done, you know, that renovated at this date.
That whole Montes plan, there's nothing on that, there is no
Okay.
plan.
So
There's
then
no
there's
plan.
no time frame.
The only
Okay,
thing
got
that is
Got
on a time frame is the admin building.
Okay,
That's it.
Fine.
Nothing else is planned.
okay, then if we fix it, we gotta fix it.
The Hall Montez plan does show, though, a really nice conceptual design of what could be, but it's not
So,
happening right
am
now.
I understanding correctly? Can we expand to or relocate on park part of
Yes.
pool area?
You can recommend.
So can we look at it as a whole, and instead of spending X amount of money just to repair or provide new toys for the fun park, actually make something better,
Yes.
longer lasting with better possibilities for expansion?
Absolutely, yeah. So you can do it in bits and pieces, basically. Start, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
To answer your question, my experience with playgrounds is they have different ages, 2 different types for different ages. Normally it's like K through 2nd and then 3rd through 8th or 3rd and up. They all have, just like everything has a life expectancy. These are dang near close to the end of their life expectancies. We've done quite a few repairs that we may be in the hole with regards to the repairs compared to the actual value of it now. But there's a lot of things to consider when you put in a playground. There's a lot of requirements, borders, the type of mulch or rubber mulch, except the ground. Yes. But again, everything's on the table. And as of right now, we're making strides to repair the existing playground equipment. Now, if and when you guys expand, we do have another playground right over here.
I need a map of all these places.
We can get that.
Bill, do you have a question?
I'm sorry, but in case I do join this advisory group, one thing came out of some of the conversation, and that was that evidently there is a budget meeting at the higher level within the next couple months. Is there any expectation that this group will have a recommendation within the next 2 months?
Yes, that's feasible.
I didn't say feasible. Is it the expectation that this group will have a longer range plan to budget for by the time this 2 months from now, this budget group reviews the budgets?
Not sure. Well, you guys can bring items at any time, depending on where we're in our budget cycle, would determine on when we can get it in the next budget. I think, is that what you're asking? How much time do you need in order to accomplish
Well,
that?
I guess I'm very sorry, I'm very ignorant about this, but I was assuming that the budget process is annual,
Yes.
and that if we don't have anything within the next couple of months for this budget, then it wouldn't be approved until a year and 2 months from now.
So there's a couple caveats to that right now. So we have to adopt our high water mark for our budget. I believe if Laura were here, she could spout it, but I believe it's June, with our final adoption in August.
Oh, okay. I heard a couple of months. I heard somebody say a couple of months, and it kind of made me a little bit nervous of trying to hasten the process to get something in front of the folks in just a couple of months. And I assume that in looking at the options and the opportunities and the different choices and trying to come up with some type of a feasible short-term, midterm, long-term solution that it was going to be more than a month or two.
So we're going to start discussions and probably then in the next 2 months with regards to budget for next fiscal year. The second caveat to your question is there is a bond that is the district is pursuing that we're moving forward on with hope to sell and close sometime in March, which we have allocated some funds for these Parks and Rec amenities and as part of that bond. And again, we can share that information with you guys before your next meeting. So I heard we need a map of the amenities for the next meeting. We need the Holmontes plan, and we need the bond information and perhaps our budget.
I apologize for asking too many questions maybe, but, which brings me to, and piggybacking to what Bill was saying, if we're going to get anything done, I personally think that waiting a month to meet, maybe a long time. We're going to be moving at a very once a month turtle pace, maybe. And A, that's just an observation. B, after we get a map of everything, be a good idea for all of us.
Individually, on your own time, not with each other.
Not with each other,
Yeah.
not as a board.
Yes.
Not as a
One on one, yeah. Make sure it's really clear. Well, I think for now, until we can get a full committee, and again, like I said, this is new for us, so we're trying to work this within our schedules and everything else that's going on. Not that you guys are not important, but we just got to make sure timing wise. That'll give us some time to get all of these documents together. And then once you have hopefully 2 new members at your next committee and we actually have a quorum, you guys can amend your meeting date and schedule as you so choose. But unfortunately, because we lost quorum, we can't take any action. But tentatively, it's the last Tuesday of the month. It would be the last Tuesday of February, which I think is a short month. You guys have any final questions? At whatever time this was, 2:30. 2:30. And Georgia will send information out. We'll work on getting you guys the documents that we said that we would as soon as we possibly can. That way you've got some time to review them. And then if you have questions or if you guys want to meet with either myself or Keith or Tim, Tim is not new to the district, but new to his role, fairly new to his role as the Parks and Rec manager. He was the pool supervisor for quite a while, but now he is the Parks and Rec manager. And then Keith being the public works director. If you guys would like, some time, if you have any questions or you want to sit down or go look at the sites and then come talk to us, we're more than happy to meet with you. Each of us has a different perspective of things. I have more of the big picture perspective, and these guys have really the day to day. But we work pretty well together. Robert, did you have anything else?
No, I'm good. I'm just taking it all in right now.
You and me both. Okay, well, with that, is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a good day. All right, good job. Was it overwhelming?